live and direct from anywhere in the world. It's The Kelley Show with Dr. Kelley Mondesire.
Hello and welcome back to The Kelley Show, real people with real stories in real time. And today is a very special episode. Why? Because I'm recently back from a trip to Ireland where I traced my grandmother's journey from a small village in Ireland to New York City. But first, I want to read something to you. This is a preface to my journey. On the 16th of September, 1893, Mary Agnes Gavin was born. Her parents were James Gavin, laborer from Polachura, County Mayo, and Mary Gavin, formerly Mary Kennedy, also from the same village. Polachura was a very poor area, and as was much of Ireland during that time. The name translates to hole of the quarry. However, that name is not registered in any of the databases. I looked in all the townlands of Mayo, wasn't there. I got this from the locals who have been there for generations. However, it was a step up for the Gavins to relocate to Swinford, which is very nearby, where pigs were bought and sold. Swinford, swine. Get it? Okay. I have absolutely no information other than a marriage certificate and the birth certificate of my great-grandparents and my grandmother. And that's a shame. Most likely they couldn't read or write because they were laborers. And maybe they could sign their names. I don't know. I don't even know if they could speak English because many of the people there spoke the Irish. Who knows? Who knows? It's all lost in time. And what a shame, because this is my heritage. It's part of my heritage. But what I do know is this, and thank you to Mr. Joe Mellett and Mr. Tom Jennings of the area who provided me with this snippet of information. Most people in that area during that time had no shoes or socks. They all had big open fires that were heated by peat or turf. And each house fed one pig per year. And that was their main protein for the entire year. Otherwise, they existed on potatoes and vegetables alone. Emigration was the only option for survival. Children who were lucky enough to attend school had to cross boglands in bare feet, dealing and braving with the pain of thorns and rough ground. And tuberculosis ran rampant. So many children died in their youth because of tuberculosis. My grandmother had at best a 4th to 5th grade education. And the story begins there. Stay tuned because we'll be right back after a word from our gracious sponsor. Take it away. This portion of The Kelley Show is being brought to you by Arbor. See it, say it, learn it. Purchase your cards today. Don't forget Arbor. Welcome back to The Kelley Show, this special episode to talk about my journey back to Ireland to trace my grandmother's roots from a maid in a hotel and her amazing journey to New York City. But first, I want to dedicate this show to all those people, past, present, and future, who either left or are going to leave their homelands to brave adversity, hunger, war, or other challenges in search for a better life for themselves and their loved ones. I want to put up a photo of my grandmother when she was a young girl. She had just been off the boat. I suppose she had been working in Manhattan. I do know she was given a job in a household as a maid somewhere in Manhattan, I don't know where, and she met my grandfather, Mr. Joseph William Kelley. We're going to put up those photos here because this is the only known photo I have of my grandmother as a young woman. I don't know what year she emigrated to the United States. I really have to do more deep diving, but it certainly was way before 1920 when my father was born. And speaking of which, she and my grandfather had 3 children, one of which was my father. And we're putting up the photo there because my father bucked the norm and married an Italian, my mother, Margaret P. Telesco. And there's a photo of them there, okay? And they had me. So let's go back to Swinford. Okay. She left a maid and I returned a physician and a speaker, keynote speaker at the Maynooth University Digital Transformation School, summer school. We all saw that and heard those podcasts last month on the show. However, once I left Maynooth, I trucked it out to Galway to visit a friend of mine and then took a day trip out to Swinsford. And I have to tell you, I packed the car, and this was my first impression of Swinford. Kirsty, take it away.
Well, this is my first impression of Swinford. It's small. This seems to be the main square. I actually passed by the hotel, the Gateway Hotel, and let's see what this brings. At least it stopped raining.
Okay, so I got into Swinford, took a look around, as you could see, not much there, the main drag and this, and I look at this hotel, and I thought, this must be it. This got to be the place. Yeah, and I'm looking up at the second floor windows. I'm like, okay, that must have been the room where, she lived, and my parents had gone back in the 70s, and they found the hotel and the lady of the house, and they went up to the room where my grandmother, lived while she cleaned toilets or bedpans. I had bedpans. They didn't have running water at the time. Anyhow, I get in there and I find out this isn't a hotel. Why? Because before it was a hotel, it was a prison. And what was next door to the prison, only in Ireland, it was the town bar. How convenient. You go to the bar and you end up in prison next door to sleep it off. However, my grandmother couldn't have worked in that hotel because it wasn't a hotel until way after she left Ireland. But here's what happened when I did speak to the concierge of the hotel. Kirsty, let's have a look.
Well, here I am. I'm in Swinford, and it really is in the middle of nowhere, and at least it stopped raining, but that is the Gateway Hotel, and that's where Mary Gavin, my grandmother, worked as a housemaid until she found the money. I don't know where she was able to, I don't know how she managed to save money for the boat fare for the ship to come over to the United States, to New York. So it's a very small town, this little village of Swinford. So I'm going to go in there and see if I can find anyone by the name of Gavin, and if I can actually go upstairs to the room where my grandmother lived as a maid. So, all right, let's go find out. Let's go see. All right. Okay, this has become a mystery. I'm here in Swinford, and apparently the hotel where I thought my grandmother worked as a maid, it was a prison, and it just turned into a hotel in the last 20, 30 years. So I met 2 old fellas eating their dinner at this hotel restaurant, And they had lots of stories, and everybody wants to know, what do you think about Trump? Okay. And so anyway, they said the library might have some of those records of who went to school during the day. So I'm on my way now to the Swinford Library to see if I can't find where my grandmother came from. Now, these two old cats said there were a few guest houses and one motel that were in town, up the road a piece, as they say. And some of them are closed now, but there's still a sign up high on one of them, and we'll find out. So I'll do the best I can to kind of solve this mystery. And seriously, I mean, it's really rural here. I mean, this is it. This is the entire town. And I wonder how long it took my grandmother to save the money for her fare on the ship to get to America. And did someone sponsor her? You know, what was her story? None of that is, it all seems to be lost. So I'd like to find out. I'd like to know. And so I'm going up this hill because people have given me 4 different directions to the library, but this seems to be the most direct. So I'm going to go to the library and see what I can find out. Well, this is quite the journey.
So if any of you have ever seen the film The Quiet Man with Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne, it's a hysterical, very, very funny film about an American who goes back to find his roots and live in this little village in Ireland. And I kind of felt like John Wayne, because there's a scene in the film where he gets off the train and he asks directions to wherever he was going, and 4 different people giving him 4 different directions of how to get there. And this little guy, Michelin, he picks up his suitcase and he just goes. And Michelin and John Wayne in the film become the best of pals. However, when I was given instructions of how to get to the library, oh my God. I mean, I just sat there while these 2 cats started arguing about, you know, how I'm going to get to the library and go this way, this way, this way, this way, up here, up there, around there, around there, around there. And then they went through, the Gavins, and how many Gavins they knew, but, he's dead, she's dead, he's dead, she's dead, she's dead. Because it seems like everybody who was a Gavin was dead. So I was like, okay. So I left these fellows and I went outside and I found this teenager. And I said, excuse me, can you tell me how to get to the library? He said, sure, just go up there 2 streets and turn right. I said, thanks a lot. So off I went to the library and got a little bit of a glimpse of Swinford. It's really small. So I'm going to take you there with me. Let's go.
Okay, so it's off to the cultural center and the library here in Swinford. A lot of really nice, pretty houses here. There we go. All right, this is up the alley, up the road a piece, and make a right. But there's some really, really nice homes here in Swinford. I can't imagine what it was like way back in the day, but let's go see what they have. I wish I spoke the language, because so many people are speaking Gaelic here. Be nice to be able to communicate. Oh well, have to add it to the bucket list.
So you can't make this up. I go into the library, which is this really amazing modern building. I said, oh, great. Okay. Hit the ladies' room. And I go into what's the main room. And I feel I'm just going to look on the computer and look up the records and this, and it's all going to come up for me. Wrong. There's an older woman sitting behind the counter, which still has the plexiglass up from COVID. And there's an older woman sitting in a chair on the other side of the counter, and they're just having the gay old conversation and ignoring me. So I know better. So I just stand there patiently waiting. And this is what this old lady was doing behind the counter. She was sitting there. And does anybody ever remember the old stamps at the libraries where you'd stamp it in the ink pad and then you'd stamp the book returned or stamp the book on the date it was supposed to be returned? She had about 60 of these books on her side of the counter. I said, oh boy, it's going to be a long day. Glad I went to the ladies' room before I got in line here, and I was the only one in line. And so they were talking about this one, that one, the other one, blah, 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 blah. And finally, she stamped that last book and looked up and said, oh, dearie, what can I do for you? So I explained what I needed, what I was after, and who I was, and what my mission was. And they listened to all that, and she took notes, and then she said, well, dearie, I can't help you because we don't keep the records here. We have no records of any history in all of Swinford at this library. And I said, because I had already been there about 20 minutes waiting for them to finish their conversation, get these 60 books stamped. However, she wrote down my name and my information and started talking about, well, dearie, this one, blah, 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 knows that one, blah, 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 blah. Maybe she knows blah, 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 blah. So why don't you come back in a couple of weeks and maybe I'll be able to see her when she comes here to get a little bit more of information for you. And I said, oh, that's just grand. Thank you very much. I said, tell you what, I'll give you my card, and if you find out anything, just email me. How about it? Okay, great. So they said, basically, good luck, kid, and get lost. And I was very disappointed because I felt like I was getting nowhere. And so I left the library. And as I was walking back to the main drag in town, this car honks its horn. And who is it? It's the husband of the lady sitting on the other side of the counter. And this is what he had to say. Let's roll to it.
Okay, well, here I am at the library, and they don't do genealogy here, although the lady was very nice and gave me the phone number of someone from the parish that might be able to help me. And they said, well, the census from 1926 has finally been released, but that doesn't help me because my grandmother obviously was in the States prior to 1920 because my father was born in New York in 1920. I have to look up the marriage certificate, what year she was married to my grandfather, William Kelley. Yeah, I have to look that up. But anyways, 1926 census doesn't really help me. So I'm going to go to town. And one thing that I have been doing is asking, does anybody know a Gavin? And everybody said, yeah, but he's dead, she's dead. So there have been lots and lots of Gavins here in Swinford, but they're all dead. So that doesn't really help me either. So again, the mystery and the search continues. All right. So one nice old gent, since I spent a half hour in the library and everybody's discussing how all the Gavins are dead, his wife just told him as he was waiting in the car for her that he just pulled up and said, you're looking for Michael Delaney in Ballyrobe, who is the genealogist for County Mayo. So I'll have to look for Mr. Michael Delaney in some place called Ballyrobe. See if I can find him and see what he might know. This is interesting. Now this is getting very interesting.
Okay, so by this time, every single person in Swinford knows the chick is in town looking for the Gavins. It was like crazy. Everybody looked at me like, it's her, it's that one with the weird French name. Okay, and of course, no one knows how to pronounce Montdesiree. Forget it. And they made an absolute issue of I spell my first name with an EY because they said that's not the Catholic way of spelling it. And I told them I was a happy heathen. So that kind of like cut that conversation in half. Anyways, I'm getting real disappointed. But then I remembered before I left the States, I took photos with my camera of all my mother's notes when she and my father went back to Swinford to find where his mother worked. And I looked on it and I see O'Connor's was there. My mother wrote the word O'Connor's. And then after that, she said, go shopping at Foxford Mills. So I said, I got to find this place O'Connor's. This is the clue. So I go into town. Okay. And I see this shop that it's selling everything from old toasters to watches to, rosaries and everything in between. So I go in, and there was a chair on the opposite side of the counter, and I just sat my butt down, and the man behind the counter looks at me like, "Who are you?" So I said, "Hi, how you doing?" I said, "This is my name, this is my story, this is what I need." And he said, "Well, did you go over to Mellett's?" And Mellett's was this like beautiful looking pub that went back to the mid 18th century, and it looked like a great place at the end of the day to have a drink and just like, call it quits for the day. But I felt, well, I'll go into the pub, last stop, because I know she didn't work in a pub, And he said, "No, you have to go into Mellett's. You have to go to Mellett's. That's where you'll find what you're looking for." So I said, "Okay, thanks." So he was really nice. I can't remember his name, but thanks if you see this, if Joe shares this video with everybody. So I go over to Mellett's. It's beautiful. We're gonna see a lot of photos of the exterior and interior of Mellett's.
Okay, I'm walking through town, and it looks really kind of old. Some of the black and white photos I've seen some of these buildings, and who knows what was what. They certainly didn't have asphalt for a street at that time. I know it was dirt. What's interesting is a lot of the photos I saw while I was in Galway in the Clouda Museum was that a lot of the children didn't have shoes, and a lot of the women were wearing something that looked like clogs. So, I have to wonder, how did my grandmother find and save the money working as a chambermaid for her passage to the United States? And it's interesting, she had a sister, Josephine, who then she sponsored to come to the States. So I don't know, did someone sponsor her? It's just no information, and it's kind of sad to come all the way here and all these old cats tell me, "Oh yeah, Gavin, oh, he's dead. Oh yeah, lots of Gavins here, but they're all dead." So, all right, let's see what happens now. And this is why I wish I had my cards, my language learning cards, that are going to be shipped to me in about a month when they're ready, because I would be able to pronounce Dublin in the Irish and Ballina in Irish, and maybe I won't find, the place where my grandmother worked. I doubt she lived in anything but a hut, or God only knows. But sometimes it's nice to just speak the language of where you come from. As poor as my Italian is, I can get on in Italy. Well, let's start to make the best of this. If I don't find her on this visit, at least I know where she came from. And this is the space and the place. This is more or less what the village looked like. And we're going to embrace our culture now. So let's go explore.
This portion of The Kelley Show is being brought to you by Arbor. See it, say it, learn it. Purchase your cards today. Don't forget Arbor. So I walk into Mellett's, and I look around, and there's an older gent sitting with his half glasses on the table, looking at his newspaper. And I said, this guy knows something. So I go over to him. I said, I sit down. And he looks at me like, who's this chick sitting down next to me? I said, "Say, mister," I said, "this is my name. This is my story. This is what I'm after. Are you the owner?" And he said, "I used to be, but my daughter is 7th generation. What do you want?" And I told him what my story was. And he said, "You know what? Come with me." And he started to tell me all about Mellett's. And this was incredible. We're going to go and show you what Mr. Joe Mellett, hi Joe, Mr. Joe Mellett showed me and told me about Mellett's. Let's go to tape.
Okay, so this is Mellett's. Mr. Joe Mellett was the proprietor. There's 7 generations of Mellett's that own Mellett's Pub. And at the time of my grandmother was a young girl, this goes back to the 1700s, this place, this is where everybody would get their grain, they would get provisions. There was a shop. Oh gosh. There was a shop in the front. God only knows what they're watching in here right now. Anyway, this is where you also would have gotten your ticket to the United States. And so it's fascinating. He told me all about the area and what it was like. You needed 10 pounds, okay, to get into the States, but it would cost about 100 to 150 pounds for the ticket. And they would buy the ticket here. They'd book the passage. Look at all this old stuff here. They would book the passage right here at this bar counter, where you would either have your undertaker, your insurance man, or anything else. And you would get the boat not far from here, actually. And so this section right here of Millet, this is where you would have had a shop, and this is where you would have bought your ticket and your passage. And it was so interesting. And this is Joe. Joe, say hello.
Hi.
All right, and thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing with me. And
I'd like to show you out the back before you.
Oh, okay. All right. Joe's going to show me something.
But I'll tell you what. See what's up there on the thing?
Yeah.
They're
Wow.
the old trunks that originated.
No kidding.
In the States.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So they were when people came back eventually.
Uh-huh.
The few who did, they brought all their belongings in those.
Wow. How
And,
about that? Wow. All this isn't original. Wow. And look at that water
It's all
pump
original.
from 1797. Golly.
Look at this is it's called the piggery, and when I was growing up, the pigs were reared in here.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Holy cow. So this is like a...
The pigs were here up until the 70s.
Wow. Wow. They had a nice home, these pigs.
Well, they did. There was no range there.
Wow. How about that?
Yeah.
I'll be damned. Look at that stove. That's incredible. Wow, this is amazing. Look at this place.
This thing here.
Yeah, what is that?
That's now what they call the. That's where the hen
Oh, really?
slept.
Wow,
So
smart hen. So the fox couldn't get them.
the laying hen.
Wow.
But that was luxury. That particular one. Now that's made out of that's handmade.
Wow.
But she was up there and out of harm's way. The fox.
Wow, yes, smart hen.
Fox couldn't get her, you know.
Gosh, wow.
So she was able to lay her eggs in
Wow, smart hen.
comfort.
Look at all this stuff. This is amazing. This should be a museum. For true. Wow. How about that? Thank you. Thank you for showing me this. This is incredible.
No, I'm delighted to show you around because you appreciate what's here. And
So while I was speaking to Joe, he said to me at one point, he said, I like you because you care. You care about where you come from. You're curious. You want to know what your roots are. And he said, it was incredible. He showed me these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sheets of paper that were hanging on meat hooks from the ceiling of Mellets. And what were they? They were the receipts for the passages over to the United States. And I said, oh my gosh. He said, yeah, I've got your grandmother somewhere in the basement of this place. But he said it would take months to go through all those papers to find where her ticket receipt is. So I'm standing on the first floor of Mellett's where my grandmother went to the bar to get her ticket. I'm standing in the place where she had to get soap or if she had one, a toothbrush or panties or stockings or a skirt, anything she needed in life. She stood in the same place I was standing way back when, what in the 18, I don't know, when was she born again? You know what I'm saying? It was crazy. And it opened up this vision to me of, she was this kid that worked as a maid and came in here and I don't know how she got the money for the ticket. I don't know where she found the money for the ticket, bought her passage, And he even told me the ship would have left from a place called Elizabethtown, but it's called something else right now. But it was incredible. And then he took me into the back of Mellett's and he showed me like all these different artifacts from, the late 1700s that is still there. It was fascinating. I felt like I was walking in a footsteps. But then he said, you have to go over to O'Connor's. And I said, O'Connor's? Where's O'Connor's? I said, I'm looking, I can't find it. He said, the sign is still up on the building facade, but it's been closed for many years, but now it's a coffee shop. Maybe they can let you in. So we're going to go, we're going to look at some videos here, and then we're going to go to O'Connor's, where she actually worked.
So this is Mellett's. This place dates back to the 1700s, and this actually is where my grandmother would have purchased her ticket to get to the United States. And Joe Mellett, seventh generation proprietor, gave me the whole talk on how the front of Mellett's was a provision store where you buy the tickets, you do the Undertaker, you buy farm provisions. Everything happened at Mellett's since 1797. This is where she would have gotten her ticket, and the ship would have taken off from not too far from here. And he's taken my information, and he's just been a great guy in telling me so much more about what life was like. And I can't say enough about the people here. Have been so friendly and so kind and so nice. So my mother had it in her notes about O'Connor's, and the name of the lady was Mrs. Higgins, that owned the inn where my grandmother worked. And guess what? This was it. This was it. It's now a coffee house. I'm gonna go in and see what I can find out here. Amazing. I've got it. I had finally found it.
All right. So I go into this coffee shop that it's this little area. Okay, nothing fancy. And I walk in there and I said, well, I better buy a coffee if I'm going to interrogate these people. And okay, I go through the whole spiel again, who I am, why I'm there, blah, 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 blah. And this is where my grandmother worked. So while they're making the coffee, which took like a day and a half to do, I mean, like, God bless, it was great coffee, but they need a faster machine. Needless to say, I'm asking them questions and they said, well, the place got really run down and we don't have the key to let you in. But even if you could get in, you wouldn't want to go upstairs because it's not safe. But they said, take a peek. And I took a peek and you could see the place went through all of these really tacky renovations and it was in complete disarray. There was an electric fake fireplace at the entrance and there was rubbish there, and you could see there was a staircase. And they said, well, the owner might try to renovate it and bring it back. I thought, wow, it's not really a swanky kind of town where you'd want to spend that kind of money and bring a fancy hotel back. But I guess you never know. But I came so close. And I was still so far. But at least my father got to see where his mother lived. And the lady of the house at the time, as my mother referred her, she allowed my father up in the room so he could see where his mother lived. And, he never talked about his family. He never spoke of his family history. He never talked about his parents, very rarely told any stories of how he grew up. But I remember my grandmother, and I'll get to it. So I left what used to be O'Connor's a little disappointed. And I said, man, it's freezing. I mean, it was flipping cold, people. It was cold. It was wet. It was raining. I was just freezing. And I went next door to see if I could buy a bottle of wine for the evening. However, the lady who was in the shop, I got to chit-chatting with, and she said, Oh my God, this is too much of a coincidence. This is too much of a coincidence. And I'm saying, what? She said, my friend's name is Mary Agnes Gavin. I said, what? She said, yes. And her mother, who's now 93, used to work in O'Connor's. And I was like, oh my God. So she gets on the phone, she comes back, and she's got this Mary Gavin on the phone with me. And she said, wow, she said, I don't know if we're related. There were a lot of Gavins. She said, however, my mother is in a home, because I said, can I meet your mother? She said, my mother's in a home and she's lost her mind. However, when she speaks about the old days of being a young girl, she's as sharp as a tack. And she took my information. She said, I'll try to get my mother to talk about when she was a young lady working in O'Connor's, because even though she would have been the next generation after my grandmother, like 20 years younger than, say, my grandma, 20, 30 years younger, she still might have some information about the Gavin family. And maybe she was a cousin. We only know my grandmother had one sister that she brought over with her mother later on in life, because it's in the census here in New York City, but we don't know if she even had any other brothers or sisters. We don't know what happened to the father. We have no information. And that's kind of like a little sad. But I will pause here to say this. I have a memory like an elephant. I can remember being in the carriage, the baby carriage, the crib, and this and this and this and this. And I remember my grandmother. My grandmother passed away when I was about 3 years old. But I remember her accent. I remember her being very nice to me. I remember she was the only person that called my father Billy. I remember she was the only person who could chastise my father. Okay. I remember their brownstone in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, like it was yesterday, because me and my brothers would play with their fake teeth that was in a cup filled with water and their dentures while my father was visiting his parents. And I could go on and on about Greenpoint and the stories about that apartment. I remember when they moved out to a house in Long Island. And I remember when grandma wasn't around anymore, and it was just grandpa for a little bit, and then there was no more grandpa. And any information I have really about my grandparents, I have from a few of my Irish cousins who in the last 10 years I was able to locate. The journey continues. The journey continues. However, I left Swinford with Joe Mellett trying to find more clues about my family. I met wonderful people, the people of Swinford, who were all helpful, who said, yeah, there were lots of Gavins, but they're all dead.
So, I just had a lovely conversation with Hillary, who owns another bar, yet another bar, whose bar is next door to O'Connor's, who put me on the phone. She said it's too much of a coincidence because her friend's mother was Mary Gavin, who worked at the same hotel. So she put that lady on the phone, who's also a Gavin, and we had a good talk. And apparently her mother is 93 and she's got a bit of dementia, but she said when she talks about the old days, her memory is like as sharp as a pin. So everyone's got my card, and I'm going to be leaving Swinford right now, but I don't think it'll be the last time I'll be here. And I've got everybody interested because they said you care. And, you know, you have to say a young girl, a young teenager working to get the fare up to take a ship to New York. And I don't know if any of you know about New York. Especially in those days, it wasn't the safest place for a young girl off the boat with very little education. But my grandmother left basically a chambermaid, and her granddaughter, me, has come back to find my grandmother. and I'm a doctor. So the sacrifices of the generations, I think she'd be proud. I remember my grandmother, and she died when I was 3, but I do remember my grandmother and my grandfather, and she was the only one that called my father Billy. And she was nice. I remember their house in Greenpoint. I remember their house in Massapequa, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But for now, I need to digest all this, and I want to thank all the people here in Swinford. To help me discover where I'm from, why I'm the way I am, what makes me tick, and the courage, the fearlessness, the courage it took for my grandmother as a young girl, teenager, to come off the boat to New York. And maybe that's where I get my balls from, my fearlessness and maybe my adaptability, because that's what she had to do. So the story will continue. Bye. Well, I'll say this. I'm going to go off to the Foxford Woolen Mills, Hennigan's Heritage Center. Let's see if they're open today. And this is the Crossroads. And look what's here. Can you believe it? Oh my God, the Italians are here. Oh my gosh, in Swinford, in the middle of nowhere, Swinford, little Swinford. And let's see, who's this? Who's this lady here? All right, well, I don't know what her story is. She looks like she's saying goodbye. And what does this say? This is Mr. Bill Durkin, to the memory of the woman who remained of something while their men sought work abroad during the 1950s. Wow. Oh, that's kind of crazy. And my grandmother left, almost just after the turn of the century. How about that? Oh, now I'm following in my mother's footsteps. And my mother went to the Foxford Woolen Mills on the trip she made with my father to Swinford. So I'm in Foxford, and there's a lovely church there. Everybody was really nice inside. I did purchase a throw from my living room, and I am going to give you a little bit of a taste of Foxford here. And I think I'm going to treat myself to some wine, pick up a bottle of wine, go back to Galway, because tomorrow is another day and another adventure.
So then after Foxford, I went back to Galway, where I was staying at a dear friend's house who was very gracious in hosting me, and he and his brother. And I met a little friend who came back to the States with me. Killian, say hello. This is Killian. Hi. He's an immigrant from Galway, Ireland. Can't you tell? Anyhow, he's got his little Irish passport. I got him a visa, and Killian decided to come back to the States and tell his own little story and share his own legacy with his little bear friends back in Ireland. So some people get clatterings. I did get a nice Afghan throw, beautiful throw in Foxford. However, some people get clatterings and this and that. I had to buy a wool cap because I was freezing my butt off, and I found Killian. So Killian is my little souvenir of my trip back to the Irish homeland. So Killian hangs out with me and the rest of the boys, because if you know anything about me, you know I collect teddies and plushies. But however, let's get on with the story here. So off I went back to Galway, and then the next day I made a journey to follow my parents' journey out to the west, and I went out to the Aran Islands, the Cliffs of Moher, and I went all the way up to Donegal, Sligo area, and drove around. And I have to say, I thought it would have been the best, greatest motorcycle ride in the world, except for the cold, wet, windy weather. So thank goodness I was in a car. But we'll do a montage of that. But Coming back here to the States, I've got stories to tell. I met great people. Joe Mellett is in contact with me, and he's like I said, he's trying to give me all and more information. I'm sharing the show with my Irish cousins so they can share with their children and their grandchildren and see where our grandmother came from. And I hope that my journey will inspire all of you, because it took courage and fearlessness for my grandmother as a young teenager. Think about it, a young teenager taking a ship across the Atlantic and landing in the port of New York alone and finding her way and building a life and having children and having grandchildren, some of whom we are very, very successful professionals. So a maid cleaning out bedpans and scrubbing floors with very little education. This is what happens. And how she had to adapt to going from no paved roads and no shoes and socks growing up to Manhattan. Wow, what a change. What a change. It's like landing on another planet. So I wonder sometimes, based on my heritage, both my Irish and Italian heritage, coming from people who emigrated here to the States, this is where I get my chutzpah from? Is this where I get my fearlessness, my courage, and my adaptability from? It causes me to pause and wonder. And so I ask you this question. Have you traced your family roots? Have you traced where you come from? And have you ever wondered why you are the way you are? Ask yourself that. However, I want to take this time to thank Billy Garnon. Billy, wish I had those Our Bear cards to learn my Irish. Can't wait to get my cards. I want to thank Billy Garnon, because Billy, you inspired me, having been an immigrant to the Middle East and building a life there. You inspired me to take this journey. So I want to thank you very much, Billy. And I want to thank all the people of Swinford who gave me their time, their love, their curiosity, and their directions. Go that way. I want to thank you all. And stay tuned for next month's show, because we're changing it up, people. So be cool. Peace, love. See you soon. Kirsty, take it away. This portion of The Kelley Show is being brought to you by Arbor. See it, say it, learn it. Purchase your cards today. Don't forget Arbor.